Debating tonight, Jo Swinson, leader of the Liberal Democrats. Nigel Farage, leader of the Brexit Party. Labour's Richard Burgon. Rishi Sunak of the Conservative Party. Siân Berry, Green Party co-leader. Adam Price, leader of Plaid Cymru. And the leader of the SNP and First Minister of Scotland, NICOLA Sturgeon. Good evening. There are less than 2 weeks to go in the election campaign and the stakes could hardly be higher. With Brexit in focus, the future of our NHS and indeed our planet, there is now urgent interest too in the security on our streets following Friday's terror attack on London Bridge. Some of you may have already cast a postal vote, but for the rest, there are 11 days to make up your mind or possibly change your mind before Election Day on December the 12th. We hope our debate tonight will help you in your decision. At home, you can take part using the hashtag ITV debate. And tonight, over 2 hours, your questions will be put to 7 politicians, questions they haven't been shown beforehand, and then they will have time to debate. We invited the parties to send their leader or a senior representative. We have 5 party leaders. Neither the Conservatives nor the Labour Party decided to send theirs. So we have Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Rishi Sunak from the Conservatives, and Labour's Shadow Justice Secretary, Richard Burgon. Before we start, each has precisely 1 minute to make an opening statement. They drew lots to decide the order, and we start this evening with Siân Berry, co-leader of the Green Party.
We are in dark and dangerous times, and this election is about trust. I know how many casually broken promises you've heard from politicians. I joined the Greens after hearing too many of these myself 18 years ago. I know you want real change this year, and things can change dramatically when you use your right to vote. I'll be honest and say that Brexit would change things for the worse, and I'll be hopeful and say that I believe you want that final say, and that you and your children are crying out for real action to stop climate chaos. That's what I stand for today. For good ideas that build up communities for the common good, for the Green New Deal, we need to prevent disaster. Our efforts together to do politics differently mean you have the chance now to elect more Green MPs, a louder voice for you and future generations, adding to the volume and the clarity that Caroline Lucas has been providing for a decade. You can make history, shine a light in the darkness with your vote. If not now, when?
Jo Swinson.
Boris Johnson can't be bothered to talk to you tonight. He's leaving it to his cheerleader, Nigel Farage. And if they win on the 12th of December, you lose. Boris Johnson will start years of Brexit talks, stitch up deals with Donald Trump, pick on people weaker than himself, and stoke divisions in our country. And that's why Nigel Farage is happy to help him win. I'm determined to stop them. We deserve better than the Farage-Johnson-Trump nightmare. Their plans for Brexit are not only about our place in Europe, they're about the kind of country we are. I love our country, our united kingdom, open, fair and generous. We are stronger working with our friends than standing alone, tackling the climate crisis, helping the vulnerable, celebrating the richness of our diversity. If you want that brighter future, vote Liberal Democrat.
Rishi Sunak.
You, me, everyone is fed up. Fed up with the way that Parliament has been paralysed by Brexit. We just want to move on. And with a Conservative government, we can. We have a new Brexit deal ready to go. We'll bring it back to Parliament before Christmas and leave by the end of January. And then we can get back to focusing on your priorities: the NHS, schools and safer streets. But the only way to move on is to elect a Conservative government. So let's end the delay and get Brexit done, because there's so much else that we have to do to move us forward, united, certain and confident about our future.
Nigel Farage.
There has never been a time when confidence in politics, politicians and our institutions has been lower than it is right now today. And that's because 3.5 years ago, all the parties on this platform told you to vote Remain, but you didn't. You said, we want to leave. And 3.5 years on, we find most of the parties here still don't want to honour the vote, want you to vote again. Some even want to revoke Article 50. And the Conservatives have had 3.5 years to sort this out, yet they sought a half-in, half-out fudge. I formed the Brexit Party because I want to get Brexit done properly. I want us to become an independent nation. That is what the vote was for, to leave the institutions of the EU and to be self-governing. Once we've done that, that's just the beginning of a political revolution that needs to happen. The Brexit Party are the new radicals. We've got to reform our rotten institutions, the House of Lords, our voting system, corruption with postal voting. Let's get back to being a proper, functioning democracy.
Nicola Sturgeon.
This election is the most important in our lifetimes. At stake is not just Brexit, but what kind of society we want to be. The SNP wants Scotland to be an independent, internationalist country, and we are determined that the people of Scotland must have the right to make that choice. But we also want to play our part in locking Boris Johnson out of Downing Street. Make no mistake, if he wins a majority, then the consequences will be dire. Brexit will not in any sense be done. Trade talks haven't even started, and these issues will cause chaos for years to come. In the rush for a trade deal with Donald Trump, the Tories simply can't be trusted not to put our NHS on the table. They're also threatening to rip up rules on food standards, environmental protections and workers' rights. To build a better future, we need to stop Boris Johnson and the Tories, and in Scotland, that means voting SNP.
Adam Price.
Politics was already in a dark place, and it feels as if it just got darker. But as Lukash on London Bridge showed us, sometimes the worst times can bring out the best in us. So how can we rediscover our lost sense of hope? In Wales, it's difficult not to feel the opposite, the paralysis of despair. We're going backwards from health to the economy. And it's Labour that's been in power there for 20 years. They're not the answer. So what is? Well, for us, it's not more Westminster. It's more Wales. Elect MPs from the Westminster parties, and they go there to fight each other. Elect MPs from Wales's party, and they'll fight for us with every breath. Like my father, when he was boxing champion, they'll punch above their weight. To Westminster, we are invisible. To us, Wales is invaluable because it's who we are. Where others put Wales last, we will put our people first because it's our future, our mothers, our fathers, our daughters, our sons, because we want them to feel hope again in those beating Welsh hearts.
Richard Burgon.
Thank you, Julie, and everyone watching tonight. Firstly, I want to express my condolences to everyone affected by Friday's attack. This atrocity should give us all pause for thought. None of us yet know the full details, so politicians should avoid knee-jerk responses. But we do know that our justice system has been hollowed out. Violent crime is up, our prisons in crisis, our police overstretched. Listen to nurses and they'll say the same about our National Health Service, teachers the same about our schools. Deep cuts to vital public services, the fabric of our communities, happened at the same time the government made huge tax giveaways to the richest few and to big business. Labour will make very different choices. We will be on your side, rebuilding our country for the many, not the few.
Thank you all very much indeed for your opening statements. Well, tonight's format is straightforward. Over 1,000 questions were sent in by ITV viewers, and some of the questioners are here with us this evening in the studio. I'll also read out some of the other questions we've had in during the course of the debate. Also here, the people who'll listen to tonight's debate. Some of them have voted for these parties behind me in the past and are thinking of doing so again, and some are undecided. All are very welcome here this evening. Now, because of the tragic events in London on Friday, which saw 2 people killed in a terrorist attack, we've got a special question first related to security, which came in over the weekend from Darren Harris from Burnley.
How is it that a convicted terrorist has been let out after serving only half of their sentence to wreak the havoc that occurred in London on Friday afternoon.
Thank you very much indeed, Darren. How is it that a convicted terrorist has been let out after only serving half of their sentence? It is, of course, the priority of every government to keep its people safe. Rishi Sunak.
Darren, thank you for the question. Of course, my thoughts and prayers are with all of those affected by the tragic events on Friday. And we saw the extraordinary bravery of the emergency services and the incredible resilience of those who responded from the community. And the overriding job of government is to protect us. That's why we're recruiting 20,000 new police officers. It's why we've increased counter-terrorism funding by a third. And it's why, to your question, within weeks of taking office, the Prime Minister announced a toughening up of sentences for violent criminals. Now, to the case in point, the man in question, he was released due to a law that was passed in 2008 under the last Labour government, where people were released automatically halfway through their sentence. We changed that law in 2012, and if he had been sentenced under our rules, he would still be in jail today. But what I can tell you is we will always back the police and the security services with the resources and the powers they need to keep us safe.
OK, Richard Burgon, can I come to you to answer some of the points that have been raised there?
Well, the thoughts of everyone are with the family and loved ones of the two innocent people who lost their lives. It's not true that the only option at the time was automatic release halfway through the sentence. There were other options available. It's now not the case either. But people don't want history lessons after this terrorist atrocity. What people want is to put victims first and put keeping communities safe first. And so we can't avoid asking tough questions in general about the Conservative decision to cut more than 20,000 police, about the chaos in our prison system, where there are more and more assaults on prison officers, and by the disastrous part privatisation and breakup of our probation service, which is looking after 250,000 people across our country in order to keep our communities safe. We can't do security on the cheap.
But briefly, Rishi Sunak, and I'll come to Joe Swinson.
Well, the facts are clear. Under the rules that we passed in 2012, this person would not be out of prison. And we have actually invested more in counter-terrorism and in the police. But the key is this. It's not just about resources. It's about powers. We want to do more stop and search. Labour opposes that. We want to do tougher sentencing. Labour opposes that. These are the things that will make a difference to our security.
Let me bring in Joe Swinson.
Well, I mean, Darren, in answer to your question, obviously it's wrong that that was able to happen. No terrorist should be released without it being properly assessed whether or not they still pose a risk to the public. So somebody like that just should not have been on our streets. Clearly, these questions need to be asked. We need to learn the lessons of this incident. I think we also need to listen very carefully to the loved ones, because there are families who are grieving and mourning. And the father of Jack Merritt, I think, was very powerful in what he said, which was that his son wouldn't have wanted this to be used as a pretense for some kind of a draconian change in the law. And I think we do need to listen to those loved ones too.
Nigel Farage.
Well, we all express our condolences, but nobody apologises. Apologises for the fact the Liberal elite have given us a ridiculous sentencing system. I don't care whether these people were in jail for 6 years or 12 years. If you have committed mass murder, or plan to commit mass murder, you're not just an ordinary criminal, you've got the virus of jihadism. And I think these people, Darren, should never, ever be let out of prison unless we're absolutely convinced they do not have the jihadi virus. But, of course, political correctness stops us from doing this.
So the Conservative government have got this wrong, in your view?
The Conservative government have been very, very weak on sentencing over the last 40 years, just as Labour have been.
Nicola Sturgeon.
Well, firstly, my condolences and thoughts remain with the victims and all those who were affected by what was a horrific attack. Clearly, the responsibility of politicians is to do everything we can to keep people safe. He shouldn't have been out. I think we can all agree on that. There are lessons that will require to be learned. But I don't think we do any service to victims or to the wider public to rush to those conclusions or to have knee-jerk reactions. And I frankly don't think Boris Johnson has done any service to victims in the crass way he has sought to politicise this issue during an election campaign. The most serious offenders, like this one, should be in jail for lengthy periods. In Scotland, we have ended automatic early release for prisoners sentenced to more than 4 years in prison. I think that is right. It should be up to the parole board to determine the safety of releasing somebody. So there must be lessons learned here, but let's do it properly in a way that actually does do a service to those affected by this atrocity.
A quick response from Rishi Sunak, then I'll come to Sean Berry and Adam Price.
Months before this election campaign, within 3 weeks of taking office, the Prime Minister committed to toughening up sentences for violent criminals. He's been a long-standing believer that our system lets out people too early. And our view is that terrorists, those who have committed the most heinous crimes, should serve the full sentence that they are given. That is a reasonable position that the British people would rightly expect, and with a Conservative government, that's what we will deliver.
That wouldn't stop them reoffending. There are 74 convicted terrorists out on our streets. There are 400 returning jihadi fighters on our streets who come back from Syria. Surely whether they serve 6 years or 12 years isn't the point. Why should they ever be let out again into society?
Briefly.
Well, our plan is for them to serve the full mandatory term of sentences. The reason they couldn't be given indefinite terms before was because of the UN Convention on Human Rights, which overruled a UK ruling. And that is something that we've said.
Okay.
If we were elected with a majority government, we will re-examine human rights law to make sure the balance
Rishi Sunak.
between security and human rights is properly matched in favour of our safety.
First of all, to say that the way to really prevent and detect these offences is with a community who doesn't feel discriminated against, working alongside the police in a cooperative way. And we do need intelligence-led, stronger policing in the community. I work in London, in the London Assembly. I know that police cuts are real. The police do not have time to get out of their vans into the community and work with people in a way that would really prevent this. Now, when it comes to people who've been recruited, who've been exploited, who are vulnerable to this kind of political ideology, we do need to have proper rehabilitation for them while they're in prison. It's no good just leaving people to fester for longer in an overcrowded prison system. We need real rehabilitation. And it breaks my heart that Jack Merritt, who was murdered, was actually working on this exact thing of education and rehabilitation. Those are the things we need to be funding more of, as well as real policing in the community that doesn't just alienate people.
OK, and Adam Price.
Well, I'd also like to express the deepest sadness that I feel for those that have lost their loved ones. Look, I think there are serious questions that need to be answered seriously. The 2016 report, which the Etchingham report, which looked at this question of parole for convicted terrorists. It seems from the report authors' claims that the majority of those recommendations haven't been implemented. The former Director of Public Prosecutions here in the North West says that he raised these issues directly with the Prime Minister. I don't know what happened as a result of that, and I think it would be wrong to speculate. We need sober reflection, not a rush to judgment in an election campaign. And, you know, I think that maybe I'm old-fashioned, but at a time when terrorists are trying to divide us, I want the Prime Minister, even in an election, to be the Prime Minister of all of us. And I think the language that he used this morning, talking about a lefty government, not only showed a huge disrespect to those that have lost their loved ones, it did a disservice to a democracy, and he showed yet again that he's unfit to be Prime Minister. OK, Rishi Sunak, respond to that point.
I think there's a very clear choice at this election when it comes to keeping us safe. We're trying to increase use of stop and search. We're investing billions in our criminal justice system, and we want tougher sentences. Jeremy Corbyn has opposed pretty much every single piece of anti-terror legislation that's comes to Parliament. They oppose the use of stop and search. And John McDonnell signed a letter saying, and I quote, disband MI5, disarm the police.
OK,
there is a very clear choice about who's going to keep us safe.
Respond to that point.
I'm very uncomfortable with the way the discussion from the Conservatives moves straight from a tragedy to reheating pre-packaged political lines, smearing the Labour Party. I think our democracy, regardless of our party, should be better than that. The reality is the Conservatives have been in power for a decade. They decided to cut the number of police by more than 20,000. We'll recruit 20,000 more police, including 2,000 more than the Conservatives on the front line. They've made a mess of probation. Most people recognise that. They've made a mess of our prison service so that people are coming out of prison more likely to commit crimes than when they went in. Our priority needs to be reducing the number of victims of crime, not writing rhetoric-filled articles like the Prime Minister did in the newspaper this morning.
On this point that Boris Johnson, in some people's view, politicised the subject this morning with the way he spoke about the tragedy, Rishi Sunak, how do you respond directly to that point?
I think it's incumbent on the Prime Minister of this country and a party in an election to explain to people how they will keep them safe if we form a government. And on this issue, the Prime Minister, as I said, has been a long-standing critic of letting people, violent criminals, out of jail before their sentence is due. He spoke about this 3 weeks after taking office.
Nicola Sturgeon.
I mean, he said this morning in the interview on the BBC that Parliament had blocked the proposals in his Queen's speech that would have led to tougher sentences. Parliament actually supported his Queen's speech. You know, there is an obligation here on a Prime Minister, I agree with Adam, to try to bring people together in the aftermath of an attack like this, not to seek to politicise it for party political gain. But on these issues, of course, we have to reflect on what happens after an atrocity like this, but we also need to do more to prevent these things, and that's where good community policing is so important. The 20,000 cuts to police in England and Wales has been a disgrace. We've increased police numbers in Scotland. Let's get more police into our communities helping to prevent these attacks, not just have us all standing here wondering how we react.
Is anybody else on the platform concerned that there are 74 convicted terrorists out on our streets and 400
We're all
returning
concerned,
jihadists? Or do we
Nigel.
just ignore it and pretend it's going to go away? Surely we need... This is not just an ordinary criminal. These people want to destroy our civilization. Surely they should be put in prison for life.
Thank you very much
Silence
indeed.
is golden.
Thank you very much indeed on that. We're going to move away from the dreadful events on London Bridge on Friday and move to our main part of the debate this evening. Just a brief reminder of the rules to which all the parties have agreed. After each question is put, each leader or party representative has a chance to respond with a 45-second answer, and the timing needs to be respected. We'll then open it up for free-flowing debate. Our first question is the backdrop to the whole election, and that, of course, is Brexit, and it comes from Namitha Aravind, who's a student from Bolton. Namitha.
Can you honestly say, and I do emphasise the word honestly, that your Brexit policy and your leadership will bring this deeply divided nation and, moreover, this deeply divided union back together again?
Thank you, Namitha. Can you honestly say your Brexit policy and your leadership will bring this deeply divided nation and union back together? Rishi Sunak.
Our view is straightforward. 3 years ago, the British people voted to leave the EU. It's time we respected that and actually left. And with a Conservative government, we can deliver that within weeks. With the new Brexit deal that we've already agreed, we can be out by the end of January. The point is this: whether you voted leave or remain, it's time for us as a country to move forward, not remain stuck in neutral. So rather than spending more years going round in circles with more referendums and the division and delay that that would bring, Jeremy Corbyn propped up by the SNP, let's just get Brexit done.
Thank you. Nicola Sturgeon.
Well, of course, the country I represent voted to remain in the European Union by more than 60%. Even some people who voted to leave, and I suspect this is true across the UK, are utterly fed up of the mess that Brexit has become, of the chaos that we've seen played out over the last 3.5 years. So my policy on Brexit of giving people across the UK the opportunity to think again and to escape the Brexit mess, yes, I do think can help to bring people back together, because the biggest con in this election is the slogan from the Tories that if they win this election, Brexit gets done. We only move into the next and probably more chaotic part of the process, and of course a no-deal Brexit would be back on the horizon next year. On the point about the union, it's not the sign of a strong union where Scotland can be dragged out of the EU against our will. If Scotland is independent, we get to be in a partnership of equals with the rest of the UK, which is a much better position to be in.
45 seconds for each reply. Adam Price next.
Look, the reality of it is this. We were already a divided so-called United Kingdom. We were divided by a huge chasm of wealth between the north and the south, between the west and the east of the country. And many people, there will be many, many different reasons for voting Leave, but many people in the former coalfield communities like the one that I'm from voted for Leave because they were exasperated at a Westminster political establishment that has never delivered economic change for them. I have to be honest to people in the communities like the one that I represent. Look, Brexit will not deliver the economic justice that we want. It'll make matters worse. It'll take the division that's already there and make it worse. It'll do to our economy what it's done to our politics, divided the rich from the poor. It will not be the answer to our problem. Certainly don't take power from Brussels. They're putting it in Westminster. Will do the opposite of economic change for Wales.
Thank you. Jo Swinson.
Well, we need to resolve the chaos of Brexit. We need to end the chaos of Brexit. We've seen for the last 3.5 years, it's costing more than people ever thought. It's taking longer and it's not anywhere near done. There are so many problems in our country that do divide our country. The inequality that for too many people, it feels like it's just too hard to get by to make ends meet. And we need to resolve those things. But we know from the government's own analysis, from all of the economic analysis, that remaining in the EU will mean we have more money. We can invest more in our public services. We will be better able to improve people's lives and help to resolve that division.
Thank you. Just a brief reminder of the question before we come to Richard Burgon. Can you honestly say your Brexit policy and your leadership can bring this deeply divided nation back together? Richard Burgon.
Our policy is about bringing people together, and that's why, as Prime Minister, Jeremy Corbyn will play the role of honest broker as opposed to stockbroker like Nigel Farage and some of the people that back the Tories, and bring people together by giving it to the public to have a final say between a credible leave option that doesn't crash our economy and reduce rights, or remain. And whatever the result of that referendum, that final say referendum, and the people have our word that we will implement it. On one hand, we have the Liberal Democrats who want to ignore everyone who voted Leave. On the other hand, we have the Thatcherites in the Conservative Party and the Brexit Party who want to ignore everyone who voted Remain. We want to bring this country together.
Thank you. Siân Berry.
I understand completely the motivation behind the question, because we're all really just hoping that the country will stop being so divided. And I have to say, I really, truly believe that the best way to finish off Brexit, to finish off this process, is with more democracy, with a people's vote. And I think, I mean, looking around this panel, we've got a majority of parties here who are committed to putting back the Brexit question in a people's vote. I do believe that's the best way to finish it off. And I do believe that Brexit would be a disaster. The reason I want to get a people's vote done is so we can get back to fixing the country, to dealing with the problems that austerity caused. And I don't think we can trust the Conservatives with another vote in this election, another government, because they've had 3 years. They've made a hash of Brexit, and they cannot be trusted again.
Thank you. Nigel Farage.
Well, Siân, you beautifully illustrate why there's division in the country, because the political parties and most of Westminster don't accept the result of the people. Losers' consent is the principle by which civilised democracy works. You fight elections, you lose them, you accept the result. That is how our system works. We have had 3.5 years, and you're still doing it. You don't accept the result, and now you want a second referendum, just to give even more division and acrimony in the country. And I've no doubt that when we vote to leave again by an even bigger margin, you still wouldn't accept it. There's no perfect answer, given where we are. But we have to deliver Brexit. We have to become an independent country, or our democracy in this country is frankly dead.
Thank you very much, all of you. First, come to Richard Burgon. Will another referendum really bring this country back together, in your view?
I think it can do. We've had a Brexit crisis created by the Conservatives, only one of the many crises they've caused, a crisis of living standards, homelessness, zero-hours contracts, and the rest of it. I think it can bring people together. And actually, our society isn't divided between people who voted Leave and who voted Remain. Some politicians try and exploit that and make that into a division. Whether people voted Leave or Remain, they need an end to 10 years of Conservative, Liberal Democrat austerity, which has held communities back, including those that voted Leave.
Rishi Sunak.
Well, we hear Labour's policy here. They want to have another referendum on a deal that they're going to negotiate, but they can't tell us who's going to actually support this deal. Jeremy Corbyn said he's not going to support it. We haven't heard from Richard or anyone else that they're going to support it. It's ridiculous. And all this means, all this more dither on Brexit from the Labour Party just means more delay, more division and more deadlock. That won't move our country forward. It will just hold it back.
Just very briefly, we know that your leader wants to remain neutral on this issue. Where are you on this, Richard Burgon?
Well, I'll speak to my local...
Where are you on it? Where will you
I'll
campaign?
answer, that's OK. I want to speak to my local Labour Party members after a Labour government comes back with that deal, that improved deal, and then we'll decide how we approach that. But the point is, there's been a big fixation on what this politician or that politician thinks. The point of a people's vote is the people whose opinion matters is the people's opinion on this. And by taking the position he has, Jeremy Corbyn shows he's determined to bring the country together and heal divisions, not try to exploit them for votes as the Lib Dems, the Conservative Party and the Brexit Party.
Richard, by taking the position that he is, Jeremy Corbyn shows that he's a bystander, not a leader. But can I ask you this? Do you think it is possible for Jeremy Corbyn to negotiate a Brexit deal that is better for our country than remaining in the European Union?
Richard Burgon.
I believe that we can negotiate the best type of Brexit deal and the people can decide between that credible Brexit deal or remain. But what I would say, Joe, what I would say with respect is I think that the Liberal Democrats' policy of revoke if they got into government seeks to deepen divisions. It's not very liberal, it's not very democratic, and there are lots of Lib Dem supporters or previous Lib Dem supporters
We're standing in an election and saying what we
it.
would do if we won the election. I think that's democratic, but you haven't answered the question whether you think it's possible that there could be a Brexit deal that is better than remaining in the European Union.
Well, the point is, Joe, that we...
The answer is no.
The point is, Joe, that it would be for the people to decide. It would be for the people to decide, not the leader of the Liberal Democrats with 20 MPs or whatever.
Let's
it would
hear
be for
from
the
Nicola
people to
Sturgeon.
decide. That's the point.
Thank you, Nicola
I
Sturgeon.
mean, we should just cut to the chase. The answer to that question is no. There is no good Brexit and no deal that is better than the remaining in the EU. I mean, what a dreadful set of circumstances we've got here. The Tories want Brexit at any cost, and we've got Labour on this biggest issue of our times can't even decide what side they are on. Brexit will cost people the length and breadth of the country, and the alternative to giving people the chance to escape it is just to continue with the chaos. I asked Rishi a question in the last debate we did. Can you guarantee that next year, if a trade deal hasn't been negotiated, that we won't have a no-deal Brexit? Will you take a no-deal Brexit off the table right now, yes or no?
Yeah, well, Nicola, we had this debate. We
Well,
got
you didn't
a deal.
answer it then.
No, we got a deal. You said, and I quote, you said it would be unachievable.
Nobody thinks.
You said it would be unachievable, your words, for Boris Johnson to get a new deal. But he did
I'm talking about the future trade deal.
Well, hang on. He did get a new deal, and you were wrong then. Do you concede that you were wrong? He did get a new deal.
I'm asking you, if there is no trade, nobody thinks a trade deal can be negotiated by the end of next year. So if you're right, fine. But if you're not right, do you think a no-deal Brexit will happen, or will you rule it out right now?
We will get... we already have a deal to leave the European Union, and of course we will finalise the details next year.
So you won't rule out no deal?
The point is, we're talking about the future.
Exactly.
You want to talk about the future. We can only get to that future and move on if we actually first respect the result of the referendum and leave. And that's what our deal does.
At the end of next year.
To leave.
OK, I don't want people speaking over each other if possible. Thank you.
It's going to give us independence. I thought you liked independence.
Well,
we're going to be a free nation.
If Scotland was independent,
we can make our own laws, catch our own fish.
We wouldn't be getting dragged out of the European Union against our will.
You can't be independent and be in it. But isn't the real key here? Labour's referendum would give us a choice, would it not, Richard, of Remain versus Remain. You don't even intend to give the voters a credible leave option, and that surely is a betrayal of 5 million of your own voters who voted to leave.
OK, answer that specific point, and then I'll come to both Sian Berry and Adam
It
Price.
would be a credible leave option. The Brexit Party talks about independence.
Yes,
there's nothing independent.
absolutely.
There's nothing independent about taking your instructions on LBC when Donald Trump phones up. There's nothing independent about that whatsoever.
Adam Price, Sian Berry, you've been very keen to get in on this.
Thank you. The Conservatives keep shouting out, let's move on, and we got a deal. And it's move on to the next cliff edge. They haven't got a deal, they've got a transition agreement. And then we've never negotiated a trade deal in less than about 5-7 years. It took 7 years to negotiate a deal with Canada. These are more lies and more slogans, and people won't be fooled again. Greens have been completely consistent in saying we need a people's vote, we need a ratification referendum, and we will campaign for Remain. I think that makes us represent the majority of people in this country.
OK, Adam Price.
It's a terrible choice facing to the two main Westminster parties, a no-deal policy on the one hand, with the Labour Party, no policy at all. I mean, here's a question, Richard, that possibly you can answer. You probably do admire Tony Benn. He used to talk about, didn't he, weather-vane politicians that just, you know, go with the winds, etc., or the signpost politicians. He was actually clear. He was against the European Union. But what we've got in the Labour Party now are weather-vane politicians. You won't even say, going into this general election, where you stand. You say you'll consult your members. You're not even able to be honest with the people. Where's the leadership in that when we're crying out for it in this country?
Right, Richard Burgon.
I'm disappointed that Adam is playing the Tory game by trying to blame Labour for the Tory-created Brexit crisis. This isn't about not taking a position. This is about taking the adult position. In our country, there are families with different views on the question of Brexit. There's people at work colleagues with different positions on this. If we want to bring people together, I think we need less of the finger-pointing, ranting and electioneering, and we need to say, let the people have the final say, and a Prime Minister, Jeremy Corbyn, will implement whatever the people say. That's democratic. That's going to bring people together.
Okay.
I don't understand why people
All right,
have such a problem with it.
Thank you very much, all of you. Let's just do a quick reminder of the question. It was about, honestly, whether your Brexit policy, your leadership will bring this deeply divided nation and union back together. Nigel Farage, if I can come to you, what do you think, then, of the Conservatives' proposed deal? You, of course, called it at the beginning of the evening a half-in, half-out fudge.
As it is, it doesn't work. As it is, if it goes through, if it's oven-ready and it goes through as it is, we're headed for years of misery. Now, Boris Johnson said, after the election was called, that we would go back to Brussels and negotiate a free trade deal in line with the Canada Plus agreement. If you stick to that and you amend the political declaration, then we will get something like Brexit. If you carry on with the deal as it was, it is not Brexit. It'll take years to deliver, and millions of people will be very upset and disappointed. So the question is it oven ready, or are you going to go for a free trade deal?
Rishi Sunak.
Nigel has been a tireless campaigner for leaving the EU.
I have, absolutely.
But the difference between Nigel and me is that only my party, the Conservative Party, can actually deliver Brexit.
Yeah, what are you going to deliver?
A vote for anybody else on this stage, including your party,
What are you going to deliver?
It's just going to mean Jeremy Corbyn in number 10.
What are you going to deliver?
And that's going to mean no Brexit and years more delay, division and deadlock.
Are you going for a free trade deal, yes or no?
Thank you, gentlemen. Well, I'm just going to ask Rishi Sunak to address that direct question.
We want a deep and comprehensive economic and security partnership with Europe. It's outlined already in the political declaration that's been negotiated, and it means we can leave the EU intact as one union in control of our laws, our borders and our trade policy, and that's something that the British people finally want us to get to.
Hang on a second. I mean, what was negotiated was even much less close agreement with the rest of the European Union than what Theresa May put forward, because you watered down any of the what were inadequate protections on workers' rights, on environmental protections, and the only possible conclusion can be is that's because a Conservative government would want to rip up workers' rights. It's absolutely the case that that's what the Conservatives want to do, and that's why it's so dangerous for people in this country who are wanting to make sure that their hard-won rights are not going to be sold down the river.
OK. Just briefly, Adam Price, and I want to come back to a different part of the question.
Another thing Nigel Farage said before he had his Damascene conversion at the beginning of the campaign was you said that actually the deal on the table from the Conservative government is virtually worse than remaining within the European Union. Now, if that's true, surely the right thing to do is ask the people again, is this the Brexit that you really wanted, or not the fantasy Brexit, the actual Brexit on the table? Is this what you thought you were voting for in 2016?
Brexit is leaving, which would mean in Wales we could help the steel industry. In Wales you could help the fishing industry. So much better we could do outside.
But the point
leaving means we do not have the European Court of Justice ruling over our country. The problem with the deal on the table is that it would. That needs to be amended. If it is, it'll look like Brexit. If you leave it, Rishi, as it is, it's not Brexit.
OK, let's just return to the question, because there's a very important point raised within it about Brexit policy and whether your leadership could bring this nation back together and, indeed, the union back together. It is on very many people's minds ahead of this election. Richard Burgon, there are those that would say by offering potentially a second independence referendum, which is what Nicola Sturgeon would request in return for some support if you needed it in government. How committed are you to the union?
Well, there's going to be no backroom deals, frontroom deals, or any other kind of deals with the SNP or anyone else. We're going for, and I believe we can and will get, a majority Labour government. And so we do not have the position of having a second independence referendum in Scotland in the early years of a Labour government.
Mr. Sturgeon.
Well, look, you know, as I said a moment ago, if the union is as strong as some people say it is, then how can Scotland be in a position of facing being dragged out of the European Union against our will? We stand at a crossroads right now. Down one path, Scotland has the prospect of our future being decided for us by Boris Johnson and Nigel Farage, or we can have the option of deciding a different future as an independent country where we're in charge of our own destiny. I think that is a much brighter prospect. On the question of Labour, I'm not asking Richard Burgon or Jeremy Corbyn to support independence, but I would be asking them, if the SNP hold the balance of power, to respect Scotland's right to choose, to respect the fact that that is a decision not for Westminster but for the people of Scotland. And I don't think they'd turn their back on the chance to govern just to block Scotland's right to choose.
Just very brief response to that, and then to Jo Swinson.
In response, just as we don't believe the real divide in our society is between people who voted Leave and Remain, neither do we think the fundamental divide in our society is between whether someone lives in Newcastle or in Glasgow. We don't support independence of Scotland. We would argue against it. We also believe that when austerity's ended under a Labour government, when Scotland gets its fair share of a growing economy under a Labour government, that may make people realise that there is an alternative in Scotland, in the United Kingdom, with a progressive Labour government looking after the many, not the few.
Swinson's been very keen to get in.
Look, Nicola and I disagree on independence. I think Scotland's best future is in the United Kingdom, that our United Kingdom family of nations are stronger together. But we have that disagreement. With the Labour and Conservative parties, time was that they pretended to stand up for the United Kingdom too. And now we have a Labour Party that is saying they're going to have a second independence referendum, and a Conservative Party that has quite shockingly said that they will put a border down the Irish Sea, despite all of the promises and pledges that we heard from Boris Johnson that no Conservative Prime Minister should ever agree to that, and they've gone ahead and done it. So neither of those parties can truly be saying they're standing up to the United Kingdom.
Let's allow Rishi Sunak to respond to that issue about Northern Ireland.
Well, our deal actually allows the United Kingdom to leave the EU intact as one UK and respect the result of the referendum. What would be bad for the Union is to spend years more arguing about referendums on Brexit again and on Scotland. That would be divisive. It would not bring people together. And maybe if I could pose a question, because I'm hearing about all these deals. Nicola, if you are going to be ending up propping Jeremy Corbyn in number 10, and we have all these second referendums, which one will you insist comes first? The one on Scotland or the one on Brexit?
Well, I support a second Brexit referendum, because I actually think everybody in the UK should have the chance to escape the mess. But fundamentally, it's for Scotland to decide our own future, because, you know, it's not right, and perhaps you can explain why you think it's right for Scotland to face exit from the EU when we overwhelmingly voted against that. I respect the fact that people here don't support independence. That's legitimate to oppose it. But what's not legitimate is to deny the people of Scotland the right to be in charge of that decision. That's a basic issue of democracy, Shirley.
OK, thank you, Nicola Sturgeon. We've also had a question from Gary in St Andrews on a subject of court that is very much part of this, and it is on the subject of immigration. Gary asks, many EU migrants work in the coffee shops and care homes of our nation. Will they still be welcome after we have left the EU? Rishi Sunak.
Well, Gary, of course they will. And I come from a family of immigrants. My parents emigrated here. I'm living, breathing proof that this is a welcoming, meritocratic and tolerant society. But it's absolutely vital that we have control over our immigration system. And after we leave the EU, we can replace the free movement of people with an Australian-style points-based system which allows us to decide who's coming here based on what they have to offer, not just where they happen to live.
Will immigration be higher or lower?
Immigration will be lower, but the alternative to all of this, the alternative to control, leaving the EU and having control over immigration, is unlimited, uncontrolled immigration offered by the Labour Party.
The population of our country has risen by 8 million since Tony Blair came to power in 1997. And you can argue about people coming and working hard in coffee shops and all the rest of it. The fact is, this massive increase in population has made our access to public services difficult, has compressed people's wages and not improved our quality of life. And frankly, I'm pleased you picked up the Australian-style point system from me, but I've got no confidence that anybody here genuinely wants to reduce the numbers.
Barry wants to come in here.
The NHS is staffed by people from around the world, for immigrants from around the world, but also 60,000 people who come from other EU countries. You're far more likely to find a doctor treating you in the NHS than you are to find an immigrant ahead of you in the queue. This is one of the worst myths that we've had to
Why are we
fight
training our own people?
over the years.
Why don't we train our own people? What's wrong with us? We should train nurses and doctors, surely.
I am proud to stand up for free movement. I'm proud to stand up for the free movement we already have, and I'm proud to stand up for the principle too. The thought of an Australian-style point system strikes fear into my heart because I know what it's like in Australia for
Richard
immigrants.
Burgon, will you
It's a cruel
stand up for
system.
freedom of movement too? Thank you, Sian Barry.
Firstly, I do want to say that I don't trust the Conservatives with migrants' rights. They created a hostile environment. They deported black people in the Windrush scandal, and now they're chasing the votes of Brexit Party supporters in order to get Boris Johnson back into Downing Street. We need to value migrants. The NHS would flounder overnight if it weren't for people who have come to this country
Just
as
very
migrants.
briefly, will we get freedom of movement under a Labour government?
If in the EU referendum, the final say referendum that we have, the people vote to remain, then free movement in the EU will continue. If people vote to take the credible leave option, then a new migration policy would need to be negotiated. That would be fair and reasonably managed, would put the needs of our economy and our society first, but also would show that we value migrants, we don't scapegoat them, we don't demonise them, and we don't criticise them in order to try and get votes. It's
Thank you very much indeed, and we'll just draw this section of our debate to a close, and we know that it is also the backdrop to very many other questions too. We'll have some more on it in a moment.
It's really important on this issue.
It's very important. It will also come into some of the issues that we'll discuss very shortly. Thank you very much indeed for that. After the break, as President Trump is about to arrive in the UK, we'll be discussing the special relationship and Britain's place in the world. Welcome back to the ITV election debate. In a moment, our next question. But remember, you can join the debate at home by using the hashtag ITV debate. A reminder that after each question, the 7 politicians will have 45 seconds to answer it. And I'm hoping that they will stick to time. Got plenty of time to debate one another after those. Now it is time for our third question on foreign affairs. And it comes from Lloyd Myatt from Stoke-on-Trent.
As Donald Trump arrives in the UK tomorrow for a NATO summit, should the special relationship become more or less special?
Lloyd Myatt, thank you for that. A question about the special relationship. First off, Jo Swinson.
Well, it seems like there's 3 people in the special relationship: Boris Johnson, Nigel Farage and Donald Trump. We obviously have a hugely important relationship with the United States, but make no mistake, the current occupant of the White House is not somebody who shares our values. This is someone who has boasted about sexually assaulting women, whose policies are discriminatory against different people from different religious backgrounds, such as Muslims, and is separating parents from their children at the border. And we should be very careful with that relationship. The last thing we should have done was roll out the red carpet for a state visit. And I think it's shocking that that's the way the Conservatives have chosen to develop that relationship with Donald Trump.
Nigel Farage.
When we talk about the special relationship, we're particularly talking about foreign policy, we're talking about defence, and indeed we're talking about security. And I would argue that the special relationship is more important now than ever, because NATO itself is now directly threatened by a European Union that wants to do defence on its own. You've only got to listen to what President Macron has said over the course of the last few weeks, what Mr Juncker's been saying, Mr Verhofstadt's been saying. The European Defence Union effectively is being set up to replace NATO, and we play a key role in this. Boris Johnson needs to make a big decision in the next few days. Are we staying with the European Defence Union, or are we staying with NATO and America? And I hope we choose the latter.
Thank you. Sean Barry.
Trump's rise obviously concerns me hugely. It's not just his rhetoric, it's not just the use of populism, the use of hatred in his words, it's also his policies. When you look at what's actually happening to children in his detention centres, I almost cannot cope with the thought of that. When it comes to our relationship with America, I just hope that after next year, when Donald Trump is gone, we can fix that and build something new. Because when I think about what we could do with that special relationship, with NATO's organisation, with its rapid reaction forces and its logistics, and the kind of budget we're talking about putting behind Trident renewal, which is £200 billion, the kind of peace project we could build with that kind of money and organisation, it's such a wasted opportunity.
Thank you. Rishi Sunak.
My grandparents emigrated here because this is an amazing country. We should be incredibly proud of the values that we stand for and the force for good that we are in the world more generally. And that will always be the case under the Conservatives. As it relates to America, I think the US is an important ally of ours, and it will always remain that case. First of all, security. We are kept safe because of the intelligence that our American allies share with us. And millions of jobs in this country are supported by the investments that the US puts into this country. They're the single largest investor in our nation. So it's important that the Prime Minister of this country is able to build alliances with world leaders around the world, like the President of the United States, and indeed like all the relationships that he's built in Europe, that not only keep us safe, but further our British interests.
Thank you. Adam Price.
You know, these are incredibly worrying times, aren't they? We see the axis, you know, between Mr Farage, Mr Trump and Mr Johnson, you know, and that's the really frightening thing. It's not just our NHS that is a threat. It's our fundamental values. The president stands accused in the impeachment process of trying to use his political influence in Ukraine. What are we seeing even this week? The Prime Minister of this country, when he doesn't turn up to a Channel 4 debate saying he's going to revoke their licence. It's the Trumpian future that's going to happen to this country unless we call it out at this election. You know, that's not the values that we want to see at the heart of our politics, but it's what's coming as a result of the special relationship, not between two countries, but between two men.
Thank you. Richard Bergen.
Look at the Muslim ban that Trump brought in. Look at the caging of migrant children. Look at the way he threatens war. And, of course, he wants to conspire with Boris Johnson and the leader of the Brexit Party in order to get his fat cat friends to have access to our National Health Service.
Not true,
if people
just not
at
true.
what's happening in
Just
the United
lies.
States of America
Open
under
lies.
Donald Trump, then they should fear that could happen here. The only way to stop the UK becoming a new version of Donald Trump's United States of America is to ensure that Boris Johnson does not become Prime Minister at the end of this general election process on the 12th of December.
Nicola Sturgeon.
The relationship with America is important, of course it is, but when it comes to Donald Trump, we should sup with a very, very long spoon. His rhetoric and many of his policies are deeply dangerous, and the last thing the United Kingdom needs is a Prime Minister who's trying to be like Donald Trump. We certainly shouldn't let him anywhere near our National Health Service, and I think it is at risk in a future trade deal. The Tories and Nigel Farage will say that's not true. Well, if that's not true, let us put it beyond doubt. Let's have an NHS Protection Act that makes sure our National Health Service can never, ever be on the table in a future trade deal, because Donald Trump and Boris Johnson, frankly, cannot be trusted with it.
Thank you. So the question went to the heart of whether the special relationship should become more or less special. Nigel Farage, there are clear and very vocal concerns about the character of Donald Trump, which have been raised by some on this platform. Jo Swinson initially raised them in her opening statement. How do you respond directly to that, and are you comfortable being his friend?
Well, Obama brought him a so-called Muslim ban, but no one criticised him. He was the one that named the 7 countries where a total stop on anyone coming into America should come from. Trump implemented it. And so these really, in many cases, are very, very false arguments. Look, Donald Trump's style is very American. It may not be to everybody's taste, but just think about this. He is our most important friend in the world, and at a time of huge global uncertainty, we should think about not just trade with America, but security, and making sure that NATO is not destroyed by the European Union. These things really matter. And can I just say, the biggest lie of this entire election campaign is that Trump wants to buy the NHS. He does not, and he will say so, I'm sure, this week when he's here.
We're going to talk about that very shortly, but Jo Swinson wanted to come in on that.
Look, Nigel, you know, you've just tried to defend Donald Trump. You know, you're saying, oh, well, you know, these things aren't what he said. I mean, we've all seen the footage of him talking and boasting about sexually assaulting women.
I was talking about Obama and your so-called Muslim
point on Trump. Have you seen the footage of him boasting about sexually assaulting women?
And it was crass, and it was crude, and it was wrong, and men say dreadful things sometimes. But the point here...
It's just all right, then.
No, they do. They do. But you know something?
In particular.
If all of us were caught out for what we did on a night out after a drink...
I'm sorry, is that what you do on a night out after a drink? Is that what you do on a night out after a drink, Nigel?
I'm sure you've lived the purest life of anybody and never said a word wrong about anything anywhere.
What about rallies where they send her home
Let's
American-born congresswomen? What about those rallies where they're shouting, send her home?
Listen, American politics is, in fact, more divided in many ways than our politics. But all these false claims, you may not like him.
He
is president of the USA, and that relationship matters. You are so anti-American, you're prepared to put your hatred of Trump above our national interests, and that's a big mistake.
Well, Donald Trump, amongst many other things, demonises immigrants, so it's no wonder Nigel Farage really likes them.
Just like Obama before.
Well, no.
Just like Obama brought the ban in. You never attacked Obama, did you?
There is a trend in politics today of strong-man politics. We've got Nigel Farage, we've got Boris Johnson, we've got Donald Trump. That, in my view, is not what the UK or any part of it needs. Donald Trump's attitudes, I think, are wrong and they're dangerous. And in Boris Johnson, we've got somebody who's trying to be like him. That, I think, is the wrong way to go. And people in this country, people in Scotland, have a big choice to make. Are we going to allow our future to be dominated and decided by the Trump-Johnson-Farage axis, or are we going to choose something much better for the future of our country, for this generation and those who come after us?
Well, I think take a step back. This is not a US presidential election. We're here to debate the issues in British politics. If you take a step back, why is he here? He's here because of a NATO summit to discuss our security.
Would you defend him in the same way as Mr. Farage?
That is incredibly important. The relationship we have with America is incredibly important for keeping us safe. The intelligence that is shared keeps all of us safe every single day, and that's not something to turn your nose at. It's something that we should be welcoming. But I'll say this. It is important when we're electing a British Prime Minister that they are someone who's not able to sustain that relationship, but they are also able to sustain those alliances that keep us safe. NATO is something that I believe, and my party believe, is crucial to global security. Jeremy Corbyn has described something that is a threat to global security and a danger that should be abolished.
Thank you. I'm going to just bring in Adam Price, and then I'll bring in Richard Berger to respond.
The truth is, the words we use matter, whether in public or in private, you know. I mean, you know, it can never be acceptable. And, you know, if you think it is, you should be ashamed of yourself. And look, who else the sad reality is this as well. We have a Prime Minister who referred to gay men like myself, you know, as bum boys in tank tops, referred to Muslim women looking like letterboxes. You know, this is actually creating the climate, right, where it becomes, abuse becomes acceptable, whether it's abuse of women or of minorities. And that's why neither Trump nor Boris Johnson are fit to be in public.
OK, respond directly to Adam Price.
Adam, I think when it comes to LGBT rights, the Prime Minister's record is very clear.
Oh, come on.
He was the first.
Defend those comments.
He was
You
the
can't
first-
defend those comments.
He did
Do you
not mean to
think the
cause
comments are wrong?
offence. Nicola, I'm not trying to answer. His record on LGBT rights is clear. He was the first leading Conservative politician to come out in favour of same-sex marriage. He rebelled against his party to repeal Section 28, and as Foreign Secretary, he changed the rules so that pride flags could fly across our embassies all over the world. So that is a record that I am proud to stand behind.
OK,
Rishi,
can I, just a moment, Jo Swinson, because I do need to bring in Richard Burgon on this, and a particular question about your leader's relationship with the President of the United States. Last time, when he visited the United Kingdom, he declined an invitation to attend a state dinner with Donald Trump. Would you attend a dinner with Donald Trump?
I wouldn't attend a state dinner with Donald Trump. I think Jeremy was right at the time to do what he did. What we need in a Prime Minister and in a government is a government that, yes, has a good relationship with the United States of America and other countries, but also a government and a Prime Minister that thinks for themselves. Jeremy Corbyn was correct to oppose George Bush's order that we should join the Iraq war. In the same way, Jeremy was correct to oppose the NATO-led bombing of Libya, which hasn't made things better in Libya. It's made things worse. It's caused a refugee crisis. There's human trafficking there. Slavery has come back in Libya. So, yes, we need to be allies with the United States of America. Our quarrel and difference isn't with the people of the United States of America. Our quarrel and difference is with some of the policies of Donald Trump, who, like Boris Johnson, is a politician who's giving the green light to sexism, homophobia and racism,
OK.
and that cannot be allowed to flourish.
Thank you, Richard Burgon. I just want to bring in another question that pertains to this issue from David in Stoke-on-Trent. Has asked a question about Trident. Should we keep our nuclear deterrent and should we ever use it? Jo Swinson.
I think we should keep a nuclear deterrent. I don't think we need to replace it exactly as it is at the moment. But I do think that we should have a nuclear deterrent in a very uncertain world while working hard for multilateral disarmament, because that is so important to create a safer world.
Nicola Sturgeon.
You don't bring about nuclear disarmament by spending £200 billion on new nuclear weapons. I would never press the nuclear button because it would kill tens of millions of people. I think nuclear weapons are a huge waste of money that would be better spent on health and other public services. But I think they're immoral. We don't countenance countries using chemical weapons any longer. Why on earth should we countenance weapons that could wipe out swathes of civilization? They are morally wrong and it's time to get rid of them.
Nigel Farage.
Well, in a world that has barbarous countries like Iran rushing as quickly as they can to get their own nuclear weapons, it would be madness to unilaterally get rid of ours. And so, yes, we have to have it, and with reluctance, yes, there may be circumstances in which we'd have to use it.
Richard Burgon.
Labour's policy is to renew Trident. I have to say, in addition, I find it really troubling in a general election campaign where politicians are asked yes or no answer, would you press the button, and politicians smirk and say, yes, I'd press the button. This macho politics to get votes. I can't envisage what being prepared to kill millions of innocent people would do to protect or make safe or more safe the British people. And I think...
Exactly.
Why have it then?
I think that politicians should stop boasting about their willingness to kill millions of innocent people just because they think it'll get them a few extra votes.
Well, why waste the money on Trident if you're not prepared to use it? If you're never going to use it, don't waste the money on Trident.
Richard Burgon.
Come on, make your mind up.
My own views on the renewal of Trident are well known. They're the same as Jeremy Corbyn's. But the Labour Party's democratic-decided policy is to keep Trident as a deterrent, not as something to boast about in election debates as being willing to press the button.
that you'd never use,
OK,
yeah?
Rishi Sunak.
We would renew Trident, and if circumstances demanded, use it. But I wanted to come back to... Richard reeled off a bunch of Jeremy Corbyn's behaviour in foreign conflicts. The one that happened most recently was the chemical weapons attack in this country, in Salisbury, by the Russians. When that happened, Boris Johnson organised the unprecedented expulsion of 100 Russian diplomats from 20 different countries with the support of the US. And in that conflict, Jeremy Corbyn's idea was to send the sample back to Vladimir Putin and ask, is this yours? Is that the kind of leadership you want from a Prime Minister?
Very briefly.
I think that's, well, one, it's untrue, but secondly, it's cheap because actually Boris Johnson has very serious questions to answer about his and his party's relationship, financial and otherwise, with Russian oligarchs.
OK, and just very briefly before we move on to our next question against Trident, both Adam Price and Sian Berry.
Well, I say to Richard, look, you know, you can try and have it both ways on Brexit, but you can't have it both ways on this one. You know, it's a moral question. You cannot support weapons of mass destruction, which means, if you use them, means deliberately killing tens of millions of innocent men, women, and children. We did unilaterally give up biological and chemical weapons. We showed the leadership, and that led to a global ban.
Very much.
That should happen with nuclear weapons too.
Thank you very much on that.
I have to add that it is unthinkable to use nuclear weapons, and I want to put my name down on that side.
Thank you, Sian Berry. Let's move on now to another question, and this one is from James Lever.
I work in the manufacturing industry, and I've listened very carefully to all of your spending plans. Now, what I want to know is who is going to be paying for all these pledges, and who ultimately will be the worse off.
Thank you, James. It's a question about your spending plans and who is ultimately going to be worst off as a result. And to respond first, Richard Burgon.
Well, our manifesto, unlike the Conservative manifesto, is properly and fully costed. It's there online for everyone to see. We're one of the richest countries in the world, and in terms of jobs, we deserve better, and our people deserve better than the low-paid, low-waged, insecure employment they've got. And that's one of the reasons that our green industrial revolution will not only tackle climate change, it will create 1 million new jobs, 1 million well-paid, skilled manufacturing jobs, to replace some of those well-paid manufacturing jobs that have been exported and lost since Thatcher came to power in 1979. I think we can do so much better as a country in terms of the economy and the quality of jobs in our country.
Thank you. Adam Price.
Well, I think one of the things that we need to do is to rebalance the spending within the United Kingdom. So what we want to see is the UK overall increasing its level of infrastructure spending by at least 1% of GDP, but seeing that investment not going as has happened decade by decade into the already affluent southeast of England, but into Wales, yes, into the north of England, Scotland, places that have been starved of investment, so that we can be there at the ground level of this green jobs revolution, rather than being where we've been for too long, which is at the wrong end, the long end of the queue for investment. We do it by having a fairer tax system, absolutely. But the crucial thing is that investment needs to get to the right places. It hasn't been coming to Wales.
Thank you. Nigel Farage.
Well, James, you work in manufacturing, and if there is a green jobs revolution, as they all call it, you will lose your job in manufacturing, and perhaps we'll come back to that later on in the programme. Look, I do agree with the point about the regions being left behind. Many parts of the UK feel as though they've been ignored for decades, taken for granted, and the argument for better infrastructure, the argument for access to broadband, even mobile phone connectivity in parts of this country is absolutely overwhelming. The question is, how do we pay for it? Well, Labour clearly are going to borrow vast amounts of money. The Conservatives are going to borrow some. And we suggested cutting things like HS2, which cost £100 billion to benefit just a few thousand. You could help millions with £100 billion.
Thank you, Nigel Farage. Nicola Sturgeon.
Well, to be candid, my party's not going to be running the Treasury after this election, but we may well hold the balance of power, and therefore we will be pressing for more investment in the National Health Service, an end to welfare cuts and austerity, more funding to tackle climate change. And we would bring to bear on that our experience in government in Scotland, where we have already reformed the income tax system. I, in Scotland, pay more tax as a high-paid person than I would do if I was living in England. But partly because of that, in Scotland, if you're a student, you don't pay tuition fees. If you're an older person, you don't have to pay for your personal care. We already have free prescriptions. So maybe it's a bit of that value-based approach to spending that we need to see right across the UK.
Thank you. Jo Swinson.
Well, Liberal Democrats are being really clear about where the money's going to come from. So we're saying corporation tax will go up a bit and that there will be some changes to capital gains tax, and that will enable us to make sure we have free childcare for people from the point at which they're going back to work from the 9 months onwards. We're also saying that by staying in the EU, we know that the economy will do better, there will be more taxation revenue, and as a result there'll be more money for schools and to put into universal credit to help the most vulnerable. But we're also saying that there isn't any easy shortcut to this, that we all have to pay more if we want better services. So we'd put a penny on income tax for the NHS. And for those who are promising a wish list of policies without saying that we'll all actually have to pay a bit more for it, they're just not being credible or honest with you.
Thank you, Jo Swinson. Rishi Sunak.
When we came into office, James, Labour had left this country on the brink of bankruptcy. We took many decisions which mean now the economy is stronger, millions more are in work, wages are rising, and we can now bring the change that you and many more want to see. Investment in our public services like the NHS, making sure that this is the best place to raise a family, to start a business, and to keep the cost of living and your taxes low. The alternative to all of this hard work, is Labour's reckless spending plans. And we know who will pay for those. It's very clear. Ordinary working families up and down this country will hit their wallets with more taxes because of Labour's spending plans. And that's a risk we must avoid.
Thank you. Sian Berry.
Only the Greens are putting forward the investment plans that are really needed to transform our economy and solve the problem of runaway climate chaos. If you look at what the Liberal Democrats are putting forward, there's barely any investment in their plans. Even the Labour Party are putting forward barely a third of what's needed. And there's a reason we put forward this as an alternative to bailing out the banks, as an alternative to austerity 10 years ago. It's because our policies pay for themselves, they reach into every corner of the country, and they reduce climate emissions. It's been a win-win for 10 years, and I really, really hope whoever's in government at the end of this election will listen to the Green Party and start implementing some of these good ideas at last. It's what we need.
OK, let's just have a reminder of the question. James works in the manufacturing industry. He's listened carefully to your spending promises, wants to know who's paying for all of these promises and who will be ultimately worse off as a result. Jo Swinson, it looked like you wanted to come in on what Sian Berry was saying.
I just wanted to disagree.
There's no capital investment in your plan.
There's £130 billion of capital investment.
That's 1/10 of what we're putting forward. It's 1/10.
I think, you know, the Independent Institute for Fiscal Studies has said that the Liberal Democrat proposals are radical. £130 billion of investment in tackling the climate emergency, something we agree on, is very significant.
OK, on that point about credible spending plans, the IFS, the think tank, has looked at both Labour and Conservative proposals and said neither are credible. How do you respond to that, Richard Burgon?
Well, the IFS is, of course, entitled to its own view, and they did say about the Conservative Party's plans that they had austerity hardwired into them, but the Tax Justice Network and various economists who wrote the Financial Times did praise and endorse our economic programme.
Rishi Sunak.
Well, James, you asked who's going to pay, so I can tell you under our plans, it won't be our children, because debt under a Conservative government will be lower at the end of the Parliament. Under Labour's plans, it will be higher. And it also won't be the lowest paid. Our plans are to cut taxes for the lowest paid through cutting national insurance. We now know from the IFS and everyone else that Labour's plans mean tax rises for millions of married couples up and down the country, for millions of pensioners on modest incomes, and for millions of small businesses. It's not rich people and companies that will just pay the higher taxes under Labour.
Come to Richard Burgon on
everyone.
That point, but Nigel Farage had his head in his hands at that point.
Can we stop this? We had it with Labour governments, we've now got it with Conservative governments, just lying to everybody. You are not cutting the debt. You are cutting the deficit. When you came to power, the national debt was £650 billion. It is now £1.7 trillion. The debt has gone up massively. Well, even more hugely under Labour, I accept that. But please tell people the truth. Our national debt now, the interest payments on it, are £40 billion a year and going up.
Very straightforward. Debt as a percentage of GDP, which is the way we measure it, will be lower at the end of a Conservative government.
Massively
Debt as a percentage of GDP under Labour, under their plans, they won't pretend that otherwise,
Even worse.
will be higher. And that means more bills handed down to our children, bills that we chose to avoid. That's not right.
OK, Nicola Sturgeon and then Rishi.
Well, I'm still a bit taken aback hearing Nigel Farage accuse other people of lying about spending. Am I the only one who remembers a £350 million lie on the side of... The NHS will have £350 million
Come on,
a
you're
week
so
more
cocksure.
because
Name
of
one
Brexit.
law.
I've just done it.
I didn't hear it.
The NHS will have £350 million more.
I didn't say that. I didn't say that.
I never said that. I never campaigned
under it.
But there is a need for honesty here. Going back to Scotland, where I'm obviously the First Minister, we have cut taxes for those at the bottom, but we've asked those at the top of the income scale to pay a bit more. That's how we manage to protect public services. A bit of honesty and a bit of those values into this debate in the rest of the UK, I think, is long, long overdue. And incidentally, we reformed the income tax. We did what people conventionally would have said would never work for a political party, and we've proved that wrong.
OK, and of course there's devolved areas of spending in both Wales and Scotland, but I must just turn to Richard Burgon on some of the points that were raised by Rishi Sunak, because part of this question is very important. James wants to know who is paying for all of these promises. Rishi Sunak highlighted areas like marriage, tax allowance and income and taxing on dividends. Just respond to that point.
Will there be no income tax rate rise for people who are outside the top 5% of earners? That's about £80,000. That is the case. But I don't trust the Tories when it comes to living standards. Austerity and cuts was a political choice, not a necessity. And the reality is that wages in real terms in this country, after 10 years of Conservative and Lib Dem government, are still lower than they were in 2010. I think our country can do better than that. We're one of the richest countries in the world. And if the economy was in such a parlous state, as the Conservatives say, why was it the case that they took the political decision to give that big reduction in corporation tax?
Thank you
the
for that
reason
point.
is they back the billionaires, not the people.
Thank you. Sean Barry.
I need to point out that the Conservatives insisting that they've been managing the economy well is just not true. The credit reference agencies downgraded our credit scores based on the fact that the Conservatives were borrowing money but not saying how they were going to pay it back. They weren't making long-term investments. We saw the spending review delayed. Now, the key thing about our plans is they're long-term and they pay for themselves. They bring money back in warmer homes, in cleaner air, in less burden on our health service, on healthier people. Now, your plans don't do any of that. You're filling in the gaps that you left with 10 years of austerity now. You have to admit that was a mistake.
Thank you. In response to that, Rishi Sunak.
I read the credit agency reports, and actually what they said was the biggest overhang on the UK economy was the uncertainty and paralysis caused by Brexit.
Of course, by your
it's
government's
only by
mishandling of
removing
Brexit.
that uncertainty and getting Brexit behind us that investment will flow back into this country, the economy will get a lift, and that will mean millions more people with higher wages.
The Resolution Foundation said that the Tory manifesto could take levels of child poverty in the UK to record levels. How can you defend that? Already 4 million children living in poverty. It's rising, despite what the Prime Minister said falsely this morning. Your policies will take more children into poverty. How can you stand here and defend a manifesto that would do that?
I can defend our record, which is clear. 400,000 fewer people are in absolute poverty today than in 2010.
Child poverty is higher.
700,000 children are now not living in a workless household. And the best route out of poverty, the best route out of poverty, heartbreaking as it is, especially when it concerns children, the best way to help people like that is to find a secure and well-paid job for them and their families.
Thank you.
That's what we're doing with our national living wage, which is making sure that wages are rising at the fastest rate for those at the bottom, and employment now is at a record high.
I just want to bring in another question on this point, because this is also about spending priorities, and then I'll come to you, Adam Price. A very simple question from Lee, who sent this in from Chorley. How do we fix our NHS? It's a devolved issue, of course, in Wales and Scotland. Adam Price.
Well, we certainly don't fix it by putting our faith in Labour, because, you know, the NHS is in dire crisis in Wales. We've got the worst A&E waiting times on record. It's so bad that on Friday night, even the Shadow Secretary for Business of the Labour Party called for an inquiry into our own party's record in Wales, where, you know, we've got a crisis in terms of maternity services in the south, a crisis in terms of mental health services in the north. The truth is, we need a different approach. which first of all recognises we have to diagnose the problem properly. We're not going to solve it by putting our faith in either Labour or Conservative parties. We've actually allowed one of our greatest treasures in these islands to waste away under the lack of leadership under both Labour and Conservative parties,
Richard
and that has
Burgon.
to change in this election.
Richard Burgon.
The Labour Party created our National Health Service when they said there wasn't the money to do it. The Conservatives, by the way, voted against its creation time and time again, but they still can't be trusted with our National Health Service. I don't believe Boris Johnson when he says our NHS is not for sale on his watch. I know that there's a real risk that he's going to do a sweetheart deal with Donald Trump. We need to end the privatisation of our NHS, stealth and otherwise, and we need to properly fund it and resource it. We need to bring our NHS back from the brink.
OK, on that point,
Richard,
Rishi Sunak.
the most imminent threat, OK, to the NHS in Wales at the moment is not Trump, it's your party that is mismanaging the NHS in Wales. And how can you actually inspire confidence in people unless you're at least able to admit the responsibility for the failings at home in Wales?
I think, again, Adam, it's really disappointing that you're playing the Tory game by blaming everybody apart from the Tories.
But you're
in Wales, the Labour Party has done a very good job with the National Health Service in the dreadful situation of all those cuts to funding from the government, Conservative government nationally. It might suit your electoral purposes in Wales to blame the Labour Party for everything, but let's not
Thank you. Let me just bring in Nicola Sturgeon.
Well, health services everywhere are under real pressure. That's true in Scotland, it's true right across the UK. Firstly, we've got to invest more. In Scotland, we spend £136 more per head than elsewhere in the UK. We've got to have reform. We've already integrated health and social care, and we've got to keep recruiting professionals into the health service. One of the debates in England is about bringing back the nurse bursary. In Scotland, we never abolished the nurse bursary in the first place, so that's why we've got 2,500 more nurses today than we had previously. So investment and reform and support for the health service is absolutely crucial.
OK, Rishi Sunak, just respond to some of the points perhaps originally that Richard
Just say first, look, I grew up in an NHS family. Both my parents worked in the NHS. I spent my childhood working for my mum in her pharmacy. So I care deeply about our NHS, as does my party. And that's why we want to invest record sums in it, £34 billion. But it's not just about the money. It's about making sure that it's spent effectively on things that will make a difference to you and your families. So that's 50 million more GP appointments, 50,000 more nurses and new, better hospitals. But if I could say this, it's because we care so much about the NHS, all of us, that we must get Brexit behind us and grow the economy so we can focus on it properly and give it the investment it deserves.
Nigel Farage.
Well, I've used the NHS a lot as an emergency patient through my life, and it can be fantastic and brilliant. But let's stop the lies, shall we? Let's stop that everyone wants to privatise it. Donald Trump wants to buy it. He's not going to buy it, Richard. Nobody else wants to privatise it. Actually, we all want the same thing. I know your party gave us PFI deals, but if we all want the same thing, could this possibly be one issue that shouldn't be a political football, and where we could perhaps work together?
But you're on the record, Nigel.
I'm not on the record.
You're on the record as saying...
And you gave us dirty hospitals, didn't you?
You're on the record as
dirty hospitals under Labour.
You saw the case for replacing our National Health Service.
I've never said
with
anything of the kind. I said richer people.
Thank you, gentlemen. Joe Swinson.
Lie.
Look, I want to talk about a particular part of our NHS that hasn't been mentioned yet. There's 1 in 4 of the people in this room tonight will, at some point this year, face a mental health problem. And imagine if you went to hospital and you had a broken leg and you were told you were going to have to wait 6 months to get it seen to, or you were going to have to travel hundreds of miles to get it sorted. You would be outraged, and rightly so. Now imagine being a teenager in mental health crisis, and when you need that help, you're told that you have to travel hundreds of miles, or it's going to have to wait weeks and weeks or months and months. It's not good enough. We've not given it the resource it needs. And that's why Liberal Democrats have identified £11 billion to invest in more mental health services over the next Parliament to make sure that we can have those talking therapies when people need them and make sure that we're properly dealing with mental health with the seriousness that it deserves.
Thank you. Sian Barry.
It is a threat to the NHS from Brexit and from Trump, and our manifesto commits completely to refunding it and also reversing privatisation, as Caroline Lucas put forward in her bill. But the really key thing that we would do is prevention. I talked before about some of the side effects of our Green New Deal investment being warmer homes, healthier people, clean air, but also we want to bring in more social care investment, more a universal basic income, the next step in social security, the best thing we can do that follows the founding principles of the welfare state. When the NHS was set up, it was sent round to everybody a leaflet that said, this is not a charity, you're all paying for it as taxpayers and it will relieve your money worries in times of illness. If you're talking about mental health, we need that universal basic income to relieve people's money worries throughout their lives. That's the big idea in our manifesto.
Rishi Sunak.
That's what we all need.
We're unequivocal. The NHS is not for sale, never has been, never will be. And this kind of desperate conspiracy theory that we keep hearing from the Labour Party is actually, I read today, a former Labour health minister described it as delusional. So you really must stop making these baseless allegations. The real risk to the NHS are your reckless plans for the economy, Richard, which would mean there isn't money to invest, and silly plans like the 4-day week. So again, how much is a 4-day week going to cost the NHS?
Who created the crisis in our National Health Service after 10 years of Conservative government? Who is ensuring the most difficult winter for
what about this
patients in
issue
the
around
NHS for years?
Yes, but on this point of the 4-day week in the NHS, have you costed that in Labour?
It's not Labour's policy to have a 4-day week in the National Health Service.
It has been one of those... Rishi Sunak.
Well, John McDonnell stood there and said very clearly that it would apply to everyone.
Okay.
Are you now saying that he was wrong?
Thank you.
I'm reiterating what he said before, which is the idea of people working a 4-day week at some point in the future, in maybe 10 years, is something which could be considered.
Thank you very much, all of our candidates on that issue. It is time now to take just another little breather. Don't go away, because in the final part of the programme, we'll be asking if these parties could possibly put their differences to one side and work together to solve some of the biggest issues facing this country. We'll be back very shortly. Our final part of the ITV election debate. Debating tonight, Lib Dem leader Jo Swinson, Labour's Richard Burgon, Green Party leader Siân Berry, SNP leader Nicola Sturgeon, Nigel Farage, the Brexit Party leader, Conservative Rishi Sunak, and Adam Price, the leader of Plaid Cymru. It is now time for our final question, and all the politicians will get the opportunity to respond, but they have to stick, of course, their 45 seconds. This question comes to us now from Carly from Airdrie.
I'm 20 years old and really upset at the state of politics in our country. The biggest issues facing us, like climate change and social care, need you to work together to find proper long-term solutions. Why can't you?
Thank you, Carly. So big issues there: climate change, social care. Can you work together? Adam Price.
Thanks, Carly, for this question, because I think it goes to the heart of the dysfunction in a democracy at the moment. You know, Brexit has brought it to the fore, but it was deeper than that. It was already there. And, you know, we've got a 19th century political system which is unable to address the 21st century problems. And, you know, no party has a monopoly on the truth. We'll all have some valid perspectives, and we have to find a more collaborative system. We have to adopt the sort of citizens' assembly approach that was so positive in Ireland as they looked at the changing the constitution over rape. There are different mechanisms whereby we can have better conversations with each other, and as a result of that, we'll get better solutions for all of us.
Thank you. Richard Burgon.
Well, I don't believe that we can work as a Labour Party with the Conservative Party on virtually anything. The reason being, they've meant that more people are using food banks. They've made more people homeless. They've made the majority of people in our country pay the price for the political choice of austerity, and it was deliberate. I do believe we need people from different parties to back the interests of the 99%, not the super-privileged 1% at the top. But that requires all parties to make clear that they won't do anything to put the Conservatives in power. People were very disappointed in the past when the Liberal Democrats said vote Lib Dem to stop the Tories, then they put the Tories in power. Let's get the Tories out and let's get a Labour government in.
Nicola Sturgeon.
Well, some of these issues are the responsibility of my government in Scotland. So on a cross-party basis in Scotland, we've already introduced and protected free personal care to help with the social care crisis. Just a few weeks ago, again on a cross-party basis, we passed the most ambitious climate change targets anywhere in the world, and we're already making progress to meet those, although there's much, much more to be done, and it involves all of us working together. So I will always try to work with others across the political divide to make progress on these big issues that are so important, particularly for the next generation. But if we are to make progress on these issues, I think the priority in this election is to vote in a way that ensures that it is not Boris Johnson and Nigel Farage running the show as of the 13th of December, because they're the roadblock to the progress on so much of this.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for this question. I mean, this is the climate election, partly because of the actions of young people who've done such a good job of bringing this to other politicians' attention. They can't ignore you when you speak up as a school-age person. It's fantastic. But this is how Greens work. You know, we're very rarely in power. This is how I work on the London Assembly. I try and get Sadiq Khan to carry out things that are in my manifesto, not his. The Greens in Scotland, they hold Nicola's government to account and get good things like the new tax structures that you talked about. We're used to doing this, and we've tried in this election too to bring together parties to try and put together some kind of agreement that we can actually try and stop Brexit together. I think that was a constructive and grown-up thing to do as well. And we run councils with Labour, and we tried to get Labour to talk to us as well.
Thank you.
They didn't, but I believe that we're trying to show the way.
OK, that's 45 seconds. Rishi Sunak.
Well, Carly, thank you. I completely agree about the importance of tackling climate change. And I think in this regard, it's amazing that our children are probably setting an example for us politicians. I have two young girls, and they focus on the little things, turning off all the lights in our house, turning off the taps when they're brushing their teeth, and making sure everything goes in the right recycling bin. And as a government, we've tried to do some big things, some of it in coalition previously, but we've made the UK the first place to commit legally to net zero. We're leading the world in banning single-use plastics and being the first country to phase out the use of coal. And whilst I think all of us on this stage might have slightly different approaches to how we get there, I think we all share the ambition of having a cleaner, greener planet to leave behind for our children.
Nigel Farage.
Well, Carly, politics is about choices, so inevitably people will have differing views and the electors decide who they want to carry out that policy for the next 4 or 5 years. But I did in a previous question talk about the National Health Service. There are areas where it seems everybody wants the same thing. And when it comes to resolving the care crisis, when it comes to the National Health Service being free at the point of delivery, there is actually quite broad agreement across all the parties. So there should be areas in which parties can work together. However, whilst everybody here agrees on climate change, I've got a slight issue with that, in that what we're doing is putting a lot of people out of work and making the poor give lots of money to the rich. Yes, we want a cleaner planet, but I don't think the way we're currently doing it is right. So there'll always be disagreement.
Our plan would create 3 million jobs.
We need to let Jo Swinson have her response first.
I think one of the things about this election is it feels incredibly polarised and like everybody's just at each other's throats. But there's actually cause for optimism. So Adam and SIAN and myself, our parties are all working together in this election on the Unite to Remain alliance. We've been working together on stopping Brexit, and although Nicola and I have our robust differences on Scotland's role in the UK, we've also worked together on stopping Brexit. I've worked with Rishi's colleague Andrea Leadsom, who I disagree with on most things, but I've worked with her on how we can try and stamp out harassment and bullying for staff working in Parliament. And Richard's colleague Stella Creasy, I've joined on many a feminist campaign and trying to protect women in terms of rights over their own bodies. So I think there's a lot that we can be positive about, where there's actually a lot of cooperation in politics, which can help us to work together on those big issues, including climate change and social care.
OK, thank you. Let's pick up then with climate change. Sian Berry, you were very keen to get back to Nigel Farage.
Yeah, I've no idea why you don't think that massive investment in new industries to retrofit all our homes, to sort out our transport system, wouldn't create lots of jobs, because our plans do. They create 3 million jobs, our Green New Deal.
Just look at what's happened. I mean, since we started putting in place green policies, and this country's done it worse than any other country, we finished up with electricity prices 60% higher than most of our European competitors. So no wonder our aluminium
Well, I challenge the idea that we've put more policies in
electricity
place.
prices.
We've had a Conservative government.
Our electricity prices are 60% higher than most of our competitors. We've done it through green taxes. And guess who pays? The average family of four pays an extra £130 a year for their heating, increasing fuel poverty, and rich landowners get given hundreds of thousands of
Renewable energy is now the cheapest thing we can possibly
But then why are the
invest
rich
in.
landowners still being
Continuing
paid
to
huge
invest in
sums?
renewable energy will make our energy cheaper, and investing in energy
It's not
saving
making it cheaper.
will save everybody money on their bills.
Well, you need a just transition. I agree with that. But, you know, offshore wind right now is about half the cost of nuclear power, and yet these two parties here are still investing in more expensive nuclear power. That doesn't make sense. I think working together is a really good thing, but you've got to be working together for the right things. So I don't think it was right for Joe Swinson and the Liberal Democrats to be in coalition with David Cameron's Conservatives and impose austerity and welfare cuts and vote for things like the bedroom tax. So let's work together to do the right things for the future of the
But on the
country.
issue of climate change, then you were pointing to the gentleman either side of you, Rishi Sunak.
Well, I don't think we're going to solve this problem by banning people from doing things or wrecking the economy. What will solve this problem is going to be new technologies and innovation, whether it's more powerful offshore wind turbines, cheaper car batteries that drive faster, or cleaner, greener homes. But the only way you can bring those new technologies to life is through a strong economy, which is why that strong economy has to be at the foundation of our greener future as a country.
Rishi, I mean, I have to pick you up on your record on this, because the Liberal Democrats in government did make massive investments and change the industry for offshore wind in particular, which has helped to make us a world leader in offshore wind. But you reeled off a set of promises. You said that there's a net zero target, but the Conservative government have got no plans on how that's going to be met. And let's look at your record. You sold off the Green Investment Bank, you stopped more onshore wind happening, and you abolished the Department for Climate Change.
OK.
That shows the lack of priority you're putting on it.
I want to touch on social care very quickly, but a quick response to that, please.
I'm actually very proud of our record. We are the country that has decarbonised faster than any other major economy. We're leading the way in banning the use of single-use plastics. And this year, we passed a very important milestone. For the first time ever, we generated more of our power from carbon-free sources than fossil fuels.
Thank
So
you.
that actually is a record
Thank you.
that I'm very proud to stand behind.
Will you restore support for onshore wind if the Tories win this election, because you're taking it away completely?
It's about moving the support to the technologies which are new, which need the support. That's what we did with offshore wind.
Thank you. OK.
That's what we did to
onshore wind still needs it, and you took it away.
Is now one of the cheapest forms of renewable energy because of the support we've given it.
You stymied onshore wind development.
Thank you, Nicola Sturgeon. I want to move on to a different question that was an element of Carly's question. That is about social care. John from Milton Keynes has been in touch. My wife has Alzheimer's, and so far her care has cost over £105,000. Why hasn't tackling the crisis in adult social care been a bigger priority, and will that honestly change on December the 13th? What is your plan, Rishi Sunak?
Well, we have a three-point plan to try and tackle this problem. The first of it is to invest £1 billion a year extra to deal with the immediate pressures in the system. The second thing is explicitly to work on a cross-party basis to try and find consensus the way we have with the NHS. And the third thing is to ensure that when it's reformed, no one will have to sell their home to pay for care.
Richard Burgon.
Well, one of Labour's policies is free personal care for older people as a start to create the kind of care service we need for our older people and other people suffering from dementia and other illnesses. And also, we will be, of course, properly resourcing our National Health Service with £26 billion extra every year in real terms. That's £40 billion cash, because our society is, thankfully, ageing. People, by and large, are living longer, so we need extra investment to ensure that everyone can live in dignity.
Yes, and there has been an observation made by all the stakeholders in the social care industry that there has never been a government in the last 20 years that has put forward a workable proposal. Adam Price.
Well, look, you know, I think this is one of the most important questions of this election. I see it in my own family. You know, I see my 80-year-old mother having to try and negotiate the complexity of a means-tested system to care for properly for my 84-year-old father. It's, you know, it comes to the basic question of whether we're a decent society. And again, you know, I don't mean to bang on about this, Richard, right? But why is it when you're in government in Wales, you're not implementing, we have free social care in Scotland, why can't we have it in Wales? You're talking about a national health and social care service, free at the point of need for social care in Wales. You could do it in Wales now, why don't you?
Richard Burgon.
We need, in Wales, and across the countries and all the countries, we need an end to austerity. The way to achieve that is to get a Labour government.
Okay,
and I do wish that Adam would realise that the people who have made the lives of people in Wales a misery is actually the Conservatives who've been in government for the last 10 years.
I just want to bring in Nigel.
You keep on saying, Richard, how disappointed you are in me. Not half as disappointed as I am in your government in Wales.
Okay.
Look, if it's possible in Scotland, answer me this. Why is it not possible in Wales where you're the party of government?
Why not?
Why isn't it possible, Richard Burgon?
Well, there have been huge cuts. There's been huge cuts to Wales from the government in Westminster. There have been big achievements from the Welsh government in relation to NHS.
OK, thank you. We just need to be brief. Nigel Farage, and then a closing thought from...
Very tough one, this. You know, people with savings and houses are terrified that years in care mean they can't leave money to their children. And yet, for the government to pay for all of it appears to be insurmountable. I don't think anybody has got an answer to this problem yet. I really don't think they have.
Jo Swinson.
Well, this is exactly the kind of issue that does need to have cross-party working, and that has been set up in the past and then fallen apart. And the Conservative government, you know, says they want to work cross-party, but you have delayed again and again and again the social care white paper and are not bringing it forward. So, you know, it's all very well to now say you want to work cross-party on this basis, but Boris Johnson hasn't been bringing forward his plan on this.
Okay, Julie, on that, no, I think on that, look, this is a difficult issue. As you said, it's 20 years. Different governments of all stripes haven't been able to solve this problem. We need to work together. We need to try and solve the problem. But I can say this. If you think about next year, should we spend next year focusing on this kind of problem, social care or climate change, or should we spend next year arguing about Brexit with more referendums and years more gridlock? The choice to get onto these issues is to get Brexit done, and then we can start focusing on this kind of stuff.
Thank you. It's extraordinary, isn't it, after nearly 2 hours that we're nearly out of time. But actually, on this point in the question about people working together, it would be nice to offer all of us witnessing this election some hope that actually things could shift in politics and there could be some better ways of cross-party cooperation. What hope could you offer for us, Nicola Sturgeon?
I can stand here as the leader of a government that's already introduced free personal care. It can be done. Free personal care has existed in Scotland now for more than a decade. My government's just extended it to those under 65. These other parties here, they need to stop talking about it and they need to get on and doing it. And to be positive, I'm happy to show them how.
OK, just on that, would you all here commit yourselves to working together on this issue?
Can I say that actually another cross-party commission isn't needed?
Yes or no? Would you all commit to working together on this issue?
We want to. It's in our manifesto.
Do it. In our manifestos.
Well, the only way to end austerity is by getting a Labour government. And we need to end austerity in order to properly fund our public services.
OK, we'll leave that question mark hanging in the air. Thank you very much indeed, all of you, for taking part in those debates on all these different subjects. It's been a pretty lively debate. And now it is time to have our closing statements from our politicians this evening. And first, we go to Nigel Farage.
Well, I hope you've enjoyed tonight's talent show. It's been a competition to see who can be the most politically correct. So, therefore, I must have failed here, but maybe not with you back at home. You know, I set this party up earlier this year. If I hadn't, I think Mrs May would still be Prime Minister. I want us to become an independent country, to leave the European Union. There's a bigger, more exciting world out there, our friends in the Commonwealth, America, so much we can do. But we have to get Brexit done properly and then reform our political institutions. And what I've seen tonight, there's no desire to change anything. So we need to get some fresh, strong, non-PC voices into the House of Commons, and let's fight not just for Brexit, but let's try and change politics for good.
Thank you. Rishi Sunak.
Ask yourself this. Do you want Brexit sorted in weeks or more referendums taking years? Focus on the NHS, schools and police, or more arguing about Brexit? To move on or to stay gridlocked? This is the choice you have. Boris Johnson delivering Brexit by the end of January and focusing on your priorities. Or Jeremy Corbyn, ridiculously stuck in neutral on one of the biggest questions our country has ever faced. Only the Conservatives can break this deadlock and set Britain free.
Thank you. Richard Burgon.
I want to thank you for watching tonight. A vote for Labour is a vote for hope. We are the party that created our NHS, introduced the minimum wage and will end NHS privatisation, introduce a living wage of at least £10 an hour and end the scandalous crisis in social care that leaves 1.5 million older people without the care they need. A Labour government will support you and invest in your community. We are on your side. Let's bring real change to our country so that it works for the many, not the few. Vote Labour on the 12th of December.
Richard Burgon, thank you. Adam Price.
I could stand here on this stage tonight because an earlier generation gave me a chance. Born in a council house, educated in a comp, free school meals kept me fed in the miners' strike, and education was my route out of poverty. There are children in Wales that will go to school tomorrow hungry, some of them without even a decent pair of shoes on their feet. It doesn't have to be this way. We could start to end child poverty this winter, not drop the target as Labour have done in Wales. We could give all our children the best Christmas present ever, the gift of a better future. If we do what we've always done and put our faith in the Westminster parties, that cycle of poverty will continue. But if Plaid breaks through, we break that cycle, and then everything for Wales becomes possible.
Thank you. Sian Berry.
It's easy to fear the future. The shadow of Brexit hangs over us. Runaway climate chaos is getting closer, and all around there is inequality. But despite all this, Greens don't fear the future. We are the future. You can trust us to keep our promises and hold the other parties to account. Greens in Parliament will campaign for Remain and let no government get away with more failure on climate chaos. We can't afford it. This election could be the last chance we have to transform Britain. It's time to change course, so vote Green. If not now, when?
Sian Berry of the Green Party, thank you. Jo Swinson.
So, what will Boris Johnson do if he wins a majority? He'll ram through his bad Brexit deal, starting years and years of more negotiations. He won't be there when the redundancy notices are handed out or when you're paying more for your supermarket shop, just like he isn't here tonight. Get Brexit done is just his latest lie. But there is still time to stop him. The Liberal Democrats are the only party that can win a significant number of seats from the Conservatives and stop Boris Johnson. And every vote for the Liberal Democrats is a vote to stop Brexit, a vote to build a brighter future, to save our planet, protect our NHS and ensure you and your family can thrive.
Thank you, Jo Swinson. Nicola Sturgeon.
Boris Johnson's Tories are wholly unfit for office. They prove that with every day that passes. But unless people vote to keep them out, we could be stuck with them and their policies for years to come, with damaging consequences for our economy and our public services, especially the NHS. So if you care about our health service and public services, it is vital that you make your voice heard by voting against Boris Johnson's Tories and for a better future. In Scotland, the SNP is the challenger in every Tory-held seat. So a vote for the SNP is a vote to lock Boris Johnson out of Downing Street, provide an escape route from the mess of Brexit and put Scotland's future into Scotland's hands so that we can build a better and a fairer country.
And that was our final closing statement. And I must say a great thanks to all of the candidates on our platform this evening, from Richard Burgon, Nicola Sturgeon, Rishi Sunak, Nigel Farage, Adam Price, Sian Berry and Jo Swinson. Thank you all very much indeed for taking part this evening. Not very long, of course, to go until the big vote on December the 12th. That's nearly 2 hours of hopefully illuminating debate for you watching at home. You can follow, of course, what's being discussed on #ITV debate. We're very grateful, of course, to all of our audience who've joined us here this evening, and not least, of course, our questioners who've travelled from all over the United Kingdom. Thank you very much indeed for watching, and there'll be further coverage of this debate on our evening news bulletin later on ITV News tonight. From everybody here in Salford, good night.